My name is Dr. Eleanor Navarro, though most call me Ellie. I was born in the spring of 1963 in Ketchikan, Alaska, where the air always smelled faintly of salt and cedar, and where the ocean was less of a backdrop and more of a living presence. My father served in the Coast Guard, a man who measured life in tide charts and compass bearings, while my mother taught at the local Catholic school, her days ruled by chalk dust and the rosary. Between the two of them, I grew up with both discipline and devotion, the sea as my classroom, and faith as the compass I was told to trust. From the time I was small, the fishermen on the docks told stories of lights moving under the waves, of creatures too big to be whales, of strange noises that made the hair on their necks rise. My father brushed them off as sea talk, but I listened, and a part of me wondered if they weren't telling the truth. Still, my path was one of science, not mystery. I earned my PhD in oceanographic engineering and spent decades mapping the seafloor for the Department of Defense. I specialized in what we called unidentified submerged objects, signatures that moved in ways no submarine or living species should. I kept my faith separate from my work. God was for Sundays and family dinners, not for briefing rooms and classified files. By 62, I had settled into semi-retirement in San Diego, doing occasional consulting for DoD and NASA's Earth Sciences Division. My life was quiet, predictable, the ocean always within view from my balcony. That quiet ended in May of 2025. I was invited aboard a DoD research vessel off Guam to observe the test of a new deep-sea drone. At 11,000 meters, it picked up something massive, larger than any known craft, moving with a grace that defied physics. Before I could process the data, an underwater shockwave struck the vessel. I was thrown overboard into the Black Pacific. The life vest inflated, but before rescue could reach me, I felt something pull me downward, not sinking, but being claimed. The pressure crushed my chest, the light vanished, and the last thing I heard was the roaring silence of the deep swallowing me whole. The plunge was not into water as I knew it. The cold that first seized my body gave way to something heavier, thicker, as though I'd fallen into a vast, unlit ocean that had no surface and no bottom. My ears rang, yet there was no sound but my own pulse, slow, distorted, as if it belonged to someone else. The blackness shimmered in places, not with light, but with movement, like shadows swimming inside shadows. Then, the descent stopped. My feet touched something solid, but it wasn't the seafloor. It was glass. Beneath it, I saw shapes writhing, human forms trapped below the surface, their mouths open in soundless screams, hands pressed upward in desperate plea. The glass was warm under my feet, pulsing faintly, as though the suffering beneath was alive and feeding on something unseen. The darkness shifted, revealing towering walls made of rusted steel and coral-like growths that seemed to breathe. The space smelled of brine and decay, yet there was also the faint, sickly scent of chemical burn. From the walls hung what looked like fishing nets, except instead of fish, they cradled human figures entangled in endless loops, their bodies twitching in cycles of agony that never resolved. I wandered forward, my breath quickening, and saw the water here wasn't water at all. It was a heavy, oil-like liquid that clung to skin like tar. Figures emerged from it, some looking like strangers, others wearing faces I recognized, distant colleagues from my years in classified work, even a few men and women from my childhood parish. Their eyes glowed faintly, but not with life. They swam toward me in slow, dragging motions, as though something weighted their souls. One drew close enough that I could see his features, a naval officer I once briefed during a sonar anomaly meeting. His lips moved, but instead of words, a stream of black water poured from his mouth, splashing onto the glass beneath me. Where it touched, the writhing forms below shrieked in unison, their sound vibrating through my bones. Above, the sky, if it could be called that, opened into a vast dome of greenish light, moving like the northern lights yet twisted, diseased. Shapes floated in that glow, massive and serpentine, gliding in circles as though I was standing in the center of their feeding ground. Their bodies weren't flesh, but something metallic and alive, exhaling a hum that made the liquid all around ripple. It dawned on me, this was not a random nightmare. This realm was built like a living machine, harvesting pain. And I was not just a visitor, I was being studied, weighed, and perhaps, selected. The walls began to close in. Not in the way doors shut, but in a slow, living constriction, as though the very environment wanted me contained. The metallic serpentine beings above circled faster, their movements synchronizing with a deep, rhythmic pulse that vibrated through the glass floor. I realized the pulse wasn't random. It was matching my heartbeat, controlling it. I tried to move backward, but every step felt heavier, as if invisible chains wrapped around my ankles. My breathing grew ragged. Then, from the black liquid ahead, a shape emerged, first a silhouette, then a face. It was my mother. Or at least, something wearing her face. Her hair was wet, clinging to her cheek, her eyes filled with both longing and judgment. "You always separated God from your work, Ellie," she said, her voice muffled, as though spoken underwater. "And now you see where that led." She reached out, but her hand melted into the black liquid before touching me, her features dissolving into ripples that spread toward me like oil fire. Behind her, other faces surfaced. Men I had worked alongside in classified DoD projects, men who died under mysterious circumstances. Their voices overlapped in an eerie chorus, recounting things we'd all seen on deep sonar scans. Massive shapes moving in patterns too precise to be nature, columns of light rising from ocean trenches, metallic sounds echoing from impossible depths. "We knew, Ellie," one of them said, eyes hollow. "We all knew they weren't human." Suddenly, the scene shifted without my moving. The glass floor darkened, and I was standing in what looked like a vast control room, but instead of computers and maps, there were massive, glowing orbs suspended in water-filled tanks. Inside each orb was a human, floating with eyes closed, their bodies attached to thin, thread-like tendrils that led upward into the serpentine beings circling overhead. I recognized one of them instantly, Admiral Rhodes, the NASA liaison I'd once briefed on a classified Mariana Trench anomaly. His eyes opened, and his voice, though his lips never moved, echoed directly in my head. "They're feeding on us, Eleanor. Our curiosity was the invitation. Our pride was the door." A crushing guilt slammed into me. I had spent decades mapping the unknown, thinking I was serving science, protecting humanity, but never asking if what we found was meant to be left alone. I dismissed whispers of things best not disturbed as superstition. Now, here they were, towering above, harvesting something far deeper than data. The control room walls dissolved, and I was pulled through a corridor of rushing water into a chamber lit by a cold, white glow. There, seated on a throne carved from what looked like coral and bone, was a figure I recognized from countless headlines and televised appearances, a former NASA director. Except now, his form was twisted, his skin pale and stretched, his eyes entirely black. "You thought we were mapping the Earth," he said, smiling with cracked lips. "We were mapping the entrances." He gestured upward, and in the glow above, I saw them, vast, circular gateways buried beneath the oceans, spinning slowly like colossal mechanical irises. Through their centers moved shapes so enormous, my mind could not measure them. I wanted to scream, but the water in my lungs only allowed a silent gape. "And now," he continued, "you will be part of the map." The glass beneath me shattered, and I plunged downward, not into water, but into a void lit only by faint red glows. All around me were people suspended in the liquid darkness, their mouths open in silent agony, thin strands running from their skulls upward into the blackness. I understood instantly. These were not just bodies. These were the souls of those who had sought, found, and revealed too much. One of them floated close. His features burned into my memory instantly. My old mentor, Dr. Cashin. His whisper was ragged. "We thought they were alien. But they are older than the Earth. And they made a deal." The deal. That word echoed, and with it came a surge of visions, political handshakes in dim rooms, documents stamped with both NASA and military insignia, high-ranking officials agreeing to secrecy in exchange for technology. My mind screamed with the truth. They hadn't hidden these beings because they were protecting us. They'd hidden them because they were using them. A shadow fell over me. The serpentine forms closed in, and I could feel them pulling, not at my body, but at the core of who I was. It was a hunger unlike anything earthly, and the terror of being erased, not just killed, but made never to have existed, flooded me. In that moment, hope left me entirely. My faith, my logic, my stubbornness, all stripped away. I was weightless in the grip of something too vast to fight, waiting for the final pull into oblivion. And then, in the far distance, a light began to grow. The light began as a single thread, impossibly thin, weaving through the black like a needle through fabric. The serpentine beings recoiled at its approach, their coils twisting in panic. The thread thickened, igniting the void with a brilliance that felt alive, warm, pure, and impossibly strong. And then I saw him. Jesus stood in the midst of the darkness, not as an ethereal ghost, but solid, radiant, robed in white that shimmered like living water. His eyes met mine, and in that instant, the weight crushing my soul vanished. It wasn't just his presence, it was that he knew me. Every secret, every doubt, every time I'd chosen data over truth. And yet, there was no condemnation in his gaze, only a deep, aching sorrow. Eleanor, his voice was like the roar of the ocean and the gentleness of a whisper at the same time. The depths you explored were not meant for man to rule. You opened doors without asking who built them. He lifted his hand, and the void split, revealing the gateways under the sea, now clearly teeming with beings not of this world. They are ancient, bound for a time, but your nation's hunger for power has fed them. And the hunger is spreading. I fell to my knees, though there was no ground, only light beneath me. What do? I asked, my voice shaking. Tell them, he said simply. Tell them what you saw. Warn them before the oceans give up their dead. The light surged, wrapping around me like a current. The last thing I saw was his face, unyielding yet filled with love. As the darkness shattered into blinding white, I woke to the muffled hum of an engine and the sting of salt water in my throat. A crewman's face hovered above mine, shouting for blankets, but all I could hear was his command. Tell them. Back in my San Diego condo, the world felt both familiar and alien. My telescope stood by the balcony, aimed at the stars, yet I couldn't look without remembering the depths, those gates under the ocean, alive and waiting. I prayed for the first time in decades, not out of ritual, but desperation. Each word felt like learning a language I once knew. Yet with every prayer came a battle, fear whispering that no one would believe me, that the truth was too dangerous to speak. Still, his voice lingered, cutting through my doubt. Before the oceans give up their dead. And I knew my life could never return to what it was. I couldn't sleep without hearing the thrum, that deep, otherworldly pulse from beneath the Mariana Trench. It followed me into daylight, vibrating through the walls as if the sea itself was reminding me of my debt. The first step was silence. I turned down a lucrative consulting job from the DoD, knowing they'd demand my reports, my silence, my loyalty to their narrative. Instead, I began cataloging every sonar anomaly I had archived over 40 years, connecting patterns no one dared publish. Then came the second step, speaking. Not to the media, but to small prayer groups along the coast. Fishermen in Kodiak, divers in Key Largo, retired Navy men in Norfolk. Each carried stories too strange for official reports, and each one recognized the same thing in my eyes. I had seen it. The third step was obedience. I booked a one-way flight to Guam. I didn't know if I'd return, only that the coordinates in my dreams matched the place where I was pulled under. His last words to me still rang like sonar in my chest. You will warn them before the deep opens again. When I stepped off the plane in Guam, the heat wrapped around me like a warning. The harbor smelled of diesel, salt, and something older, the kind of scent that stirs instincts buried deep in the human marrow. I knew this was not just another trip. It was the return to the place where the ocean had swallowed me, where God had torn the veil and let me see what few could bear. For weeks, I lived in a modest room above a bait shop. My days were spent meeting locals, not scientists, fishermen, freedivers, even old women who claimed to have seen lights walking on the water in their youth. At night, I'd walk to the pier with a notebook, sketching the patterns of the tides, matching them to the dreams that still came without mercy. The U.S. Navy still ran quiet patrols offshore. I'd see their silhouettes at dusk, hear the low growl of engines far out in the black. Every instinct told me they knew more than they admitted, just as I once did. But now I was free from their chain of command. My orders came from a different source. One evening, the water was glass. No wind, no swell, just a mirror stretching to the horizon. I prayed aloud, not caring who heard. If this is the time, show me. If this is the warning, let me carry it. And then, the pulse. The same impossible vibration I'd felt in the deep, but louder, closer. The dock shuddered beneath my feet. A shadow moved beneath the surface, vast enough to block the star's reflection. My breath caught. It wasn't a submarine, wasn't a whale. I didn't see its full shape, only the impossible scale, the shifting luminescence, the sense of something ancient turning its attention toward me. And then, as if on a hidden current, the words came, not from the water, but from within my own soul. When they open the deep, the world will drink what it cannot swallow. I understood then. My life's remaining years would not be quiet. I would write, I would speak, I would cross oceans if I had to. Not for science, not for recognition, but because I had seen the abyss, and I had stood before the one who rules over it. I left Guam months later with only a backpack, a waterproof recorder, and the conviction that truth must travel faster than fear. The ocean still calls to me at night, but I no longer fear the sound. It is not the deep that terrifies me anymore. It is the thought of ignoring the warning. From this day until my last breath, I will carry it. And when I am gone, I pray the words will remain like a beacon in the storm. What lies beneath is not sleeping, and God will not let it rise unnoticed.